Now, in Romans 12, verse 2, we read some words that I want to share with you. It says this: "Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." All outreach efforts need to take seed in the soil of a congregation that has been spiritually prepared. They need to be prepared with a proper attitude and desire for service. God requires a fellowship that is of one mind and purpose. The transformation of our mind enables us to discern what the will of God actually is. That transformation takes place when we surrender all of ourselves to his control. God can use you. God can use you mightily when he is working out his plan through you. We begin to prepare ourselves for his work by allowing God to do a transforming work in our minds as well as in our hearts. To be used of God requires a God-centered attitude. Whenever a Christian embarks on an aggressive program of outreach, you can be sure that Satan will be in the neighborhood doing whatever he can to thwart those efforts. In Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 through 10, we read of Christ's encounter with the devil. Tempting Jesus, he was trying to thwart the grand design of God Jehovah by offering Jesus all kinds of inducements. And what was Jesus' response? He simply said and commanded, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." You can bet that if Satan is so bold as to go after Jesus, he will not hesitate to thwart any plan you and I and the church put into place to reach the lost and eliminate human suffering. Satan is our greatest adversary. We must win the victory over his influence. Jesus won the victory by commanding that Satan take his leave, and Scripture declares, "Then the devil left him, and angels came and attended him." When the devil interferes with our efforts to do God's will, we also must command him to leave with the confidence that angels will attend our efforts and the devil will flee. Also, we must take care that Satan is not using us to impede the very mission God has given. He will place obstacles in our way as we strive to reach out and help people. In very subtle ways, he devises his plan to use even the faithful in his campaign against God's plan. We must be ever so careful not to get caught up in a variety of attitudes, negative attitudes and behavior which will impede the ministry we are attempting to implement. There are always impediments to effective ministry which have to be dealt with before those impediments can be eliminated. One of those impediments is a poor attitude. Joshua's soldiers must have possessed the appropriate attitude necessary to carry out God's plan. And I believe that it's safe to assume that Joshua's army was a loyal and dedicated group of soldiers. While they may have had the traditional sources of frustration that soldiers of all armies have, I remember when I was in the military service all too well, the kinds of frustrations that will come the soldiers' way. Well, they no doubt had those traditional sources of frustration. They most likely, however, were a group of men who shared a common vision and goal, which was compatible with their leader, General Joshua. Charles Swindoll, in his book Attitudes, has written these words: "The longer I live, the more I realize the impact of attitude on life. Attitude to me is more important than facts. It is more important than the past, than education, than money, than circumstances, than failures, than successes, than what other people think, say, or do. It is more important than appearance, giftedness, or skill. It will make or break a company, a church, or a home. The remarkable thing is we have a choice every day regarding the attitude we will embrace for that day. We cannot change our past. We cannot change the fact that people will act in a certain way. We cannot change the inevitable. The only thing that we can do is play on the one string that we have, and that is our attitude. I am convinced that life is 10% what happens to me and 90% how I react to it. And so it is with you. We are in charge of our attitudes. Well, I do believe we are in control of our attitudes. We're not in charge of the attitudes of others. We must, however, disciple those who suffer from chronic pessimism and help them discover the wonderful truth that God can accomplish all that He desires in us and through us. The spiritual health of our congregations depends upon the successes in changing attitudes, and that begins with each one of us. God will use you to help bring others along and experience the joy of doing the will of God. Many years ago, Dr. Norman Vincent Peale wrote a book, The Power of Positive Thinking. What a wonderful book it is. It helps Christians develop precisely the mindset that we need for successful ministry. However, after Dr. Peale's book was published, there was a lot of disagreement within the Christian church. Many church leaders decrying the notion that ministries can be affected by attitude. Dr. Peale became something of a pariah, and he was widely criticized. Interestingly, the negative attitudes that were displayed following the book's publication actually supported Dr. Peale's contention that God's people need a positive attitude. They need an attitude change. Because when negative attitudes are displayed, God is inhibited in what He can do through us. But when positive attitudes are displayed, God can do wonderful things through each one of us. We must examine our attitude. It will be critical to our success. We should be excited about our church and its mission. We are God's foot soldiers, and we are marching on to victory. Well, let's move along. There are some in our churches whose unhappiness stems from what I call clubhouse religion. Now, this is different than the negative attitudes that I've already referred to. These are people who view their church and small religious society with restricted access. They and perhaps their family and friends are the members of this closed society, and they're not keen on the idea of open enrollment, so to speak. Many of these individuals have been in one congregation for many years, and they share a proprietary attitude as it regards the church and its program. In other words, the church exists to meet their needs. The church exists to meet their needs, and many newcomers threaten their position within the congregation. After all, the congregation belongs to them. They own it. They view the traditional program of the church as having been designed for them and their families, and newcomers put at risk their ability to maintain control of the clubhouse. These attitudes are especially evident in congregations where 3 or 4, and perhaps even more than that, families dominate the membership and the church leadership. Perhaps they control the purse strings and serve on church committees. They may be the ones who are in charge of the Sunday school, or the ones who provide the music or run the fundraising programs. Whatever their level of involvement, they see the church as a wholly owned subsidiary of their private group of family members and friends. After all, they are the ones who have kept the church open over the years. and newcomers threaten their sense of ownership and control. These church members often say they support the idea of growth and outreach, but when new people come, they resent them and often find subtle ways, or perhaps even not so subtle ways, to drive them away. Such attitudes always thwart God's ability to use His people. God can use you to change the attitudes by setting the example for others. We have come together, and the title of this seminar is That God May Use Me. Well, this is one way that God can use you, and that is by setting the proper attitude within your congregation.